Chapter 24, The Family, from JE2US-A Novel. The meeting with the president had been cut short. A call came in that he needed to take. As he was scooting us out, he grabbed both Jesus and Sebastian by the arms and said, "Please, we don't need any more violence. Will you both promise me that you will not instigate or promote unnecessary violence to achieve whatever it is you're trying to achieve?" He looked at Jesus as he said it. I was thinking his focus would have been better spent on Sebastian. "Absolutely, Mr. President," said Sebastian. "You can count on me." Jesus nodded. My alarm went off at 5:30 Saturday morning. Yes, I know why the family, slaves, meet for church so early, but I was hoping that Jesus wouldn't be expecting us all to be there every week at this time. He had asked all of us to attend this weekend. He seemed to be insinuating that he would have something more significant in his message to the family. These events were starting to take on some of the atmosphere of Susie's homily nights at the Neon Cathedral. Well, minus the live well, sin well chant at the end. The Church of the Brotherhood had become a weekly media event now, with TV cameras and the press hovering. Today's event was just east of downtown along the banks of the Mississippi. There was room for about 10,000 or so underneath the bluffs, and by 6 a.m. it was packed. It had only been 4 days since the big demonstration, so tensions were still running high. That day, the state police had descended on the crowd with armored vehicles, tear gas, rubber bullets, and pepper spray. Things had stayed peaceful, minus some random looting and a few cars turned over and maybe 1 or 2 police cars set on fire. Then, when the police in riot gear showed up in armored vehicles, trying to push the crowd out of the streets, people were getting run over, the crowd unable to move at the pace the police wanted. That's when things got a bit more ugly. When the final toll was in, there were 23 dead slaves and 4 dead police. President Chatsworth did the right thing to bring Jesus and Sebastian together. However, the problem reached far beyond the two of them. I'm sure the president knew this, but was just trying to deal with the obvious, surface problem, knowing that to fix a system that was inherently broken would take years or possibly decades. Corruption was so rampant in the government. There were so many under-the-table agreements being effected between church and state, not to mention monopolistic trinities between church, state, and corporate interests, that it seemed the only solution was to completely dismantle the government, religion, or both, and start over. I suppose that's the definition of revolution, and that's what Judas, along with several from the tribe, were really hoping for, to the toppling of Baal and Congress. John was fully in that camp in the beginning, but it seemed like he was pitching his tent in softer soil lately. I think Jesus was starting to get through to him. He had been using the L word more frequently and even writing songs about it. Rosalita was drifting that direction as well. She had been respectfully standing up against the status quo at the city council meetings lately, making inferences that were probably going to prevent her from getting reelected. She didn't seem to care. Conversely, I think James was getting more radicalized by the day. I heard he and John having it out one day. John was trying to talk James into dialing back the night excursions, while James questioned John's loyalties. If you're not willing to fight and die for what you believe, what good are your beliefs? The thing about those two, I would never question either of them with regard to sincerity and being all in for a cause. But the approaches they took to accomplish those ends were drifting further and further apart. Peter, he confused me. He's got a temper the size of a dump truck, and when the engine revved, he could be the most violently destructive of all. But in more sane moments, he was the most tender, compassionate man you had ever met. He and John were being taken in by the L word, and it was changing them, tangibly changing them. Jesus had talked about how he would change the world with love, and to be honest, I suspected that was just talk, some sort of metaphysical stereotype, blind pie-in-the-sky idealism. But when you see guys like Peter and John change, really change, maybe Jesus knows what he's talking about. I was drifting that way myself, mostly because of Jesus, but also because of what I was seeing in Maddie. When we first met, she was a pretty angry person. Her hatred for the governor was barely hidden beneath her epidermis. And if you bumped her the wrong way, it came oozing out of her pores in flashes of vitriol. Lately, I caught her talking about the governor as if she felt sorry for him, like he doesn't really know what he's doing, so she can't fully blame him for his actions. Where is that coming from? And I have to say, the way she has treated and loved me through this past week, I'm not sure I would even be here if it wasn't for her. Were my feelings for her skewing things? Probably. No doubt I was falling for this slave girl. But the fact of the matter is that all of us, at least those of us who were willing to give his words entrance into our consciousness, were being notably changed, inch by inch. "How are you, my children?" his voice echoed through the river valley, up to the lock and dams under the Stone Arch Bridge, finally ricocheting off the downtown skyscrapers. I'm not sure where the PA system had come from, but it had the power to scatter the words of Jesus like shrapnel from an IED. The massive crowd cheered at the sound of his voice. He loved referring to us as his children. I always expected people to be offended by that, but this crowd welcomed the familial attachment that bound their future to this Messiah. "It's been a hard week," he paused. "We lost some from our family," nods of acknowledgement, "and they lost some from theirs." Silence. Jesus continued, "Both are losses. Neither are right." He looked across the thousands of faces looking to him for hope. "I have things I need to tell you today. Words of great significance. Words that can change you if you let them. Difficult words, not just for you, but for me." He held up his right hand, turned it outwards so all could see his number. "Does this look familiar?" he asked. There were more chuckles, some laughter. A few people held up their hands, then more and more, till the throng was holding their hands in the air in a sort of fraternal salute. It's an ugly identity. It's an evil symbol. But even more, it's the symbol of the failure of love. Silent agreement. But it's even more than that. Jesus raised his hand again. It's a symbol of family. It's a mark that says, I am your brother. We are in this together. We will stay strong. We will survive. We will fight for our freedom. A cheer erupted with 10,000 slaves jumping to their feet. Somewhere Judas was smiling and President Chatsworth was cringing. Sebastian was reaching for his phone. But what does that mean? Fight for freedom, he asked. We marched through downtown Minneapolis this week. That is our fight. We let our voices be heard. That is our fight. We made logical arguments for freedom. That is our fight. Then he shifted a bit and continued. We looted some stores. That is not our fight. We burned several police cars. That is not our fight. I heard some mumbling start to trickle through the ranks. We killed several police officers. That is not our fight. If we want this symbol, again he held up his hand, if we want to stand for something different, something better, something more true that isn't a failure of love, then we need to fight differently. If we want to live in a system that works, that isn't marked by an eye for an eye and ruled by retribution and revenge, then we must fight differently. The conviction in his voice was palpable. It's easy for us to come together and hold hands and sing songs of unity, to say we are brothers and to love each other, loving our friends, loving our family. That's easy. But if we are to fight differently, we must learn to love differently. Now, with slow enunciation and precision, he said, we must learn to love our enemies. Mumbling started again. We must learn to love our masters. Now the mumbling grew into an audible murmur. Jesus let it ride for about 15 seconds. I looked at Maddie to see how she was reacting. I saw tears in her eyes, but they weren't tears of anger. They were tears of recognition. She knew what he was saying. She was beginning to understand that fight, loving differently, what it looked like. I put my arm around her and pulled her in. And here's the key to what I'm telling you. Until we learn to love differently, we can never be free. We may be able to buy ourselves out of this slavery, he held up his hand, but we won't be free from this slavery. He put his hand across his heart. Please listen to me, my friends. I know this is a hard teaching, but it is so very important. Freedom is not marked by the absence of a number. You can be free inside while enslaved outside. You can serve the governor as his slave and in a miraculous way be more free than he is. I pulled Maddie tighter. This different kind of love is what can make you free. It is the only thing that can make you free. Free no matter what your situation, no matter who owns you. I have news for you. You are not the only slaves in the city. Everyone wears a number of some sort. Every walking, breathing human being is a slave to something I call sin. Jesus now turned and looked at the Mississippi behind him. The river was 200 yards across. The current was strong, billions of gallons flowing headlong toward the Gulf of Mexico. Sin is like this river. It picks up whatever is in its path and carries it south. It doesn't ask which way you'd like to go. It doesn't ask if you'd like to go. It takes you where it is going. The river is hell-bent for destruction and death. It has no other destinations, just this one. When you swim in its waters, you will fail, you will succumb, you will die. Everyone does. Jesus turned back to the crowd. With compassion, he said, my Father saw your predicament, and in his great love for you, his different kind of love, he sent me here to rescue you, to teach you how to love, to show you how to swim upstream. From somewhere in the crowd, a voice yelled, a dead thing can go with the stream. Only a living thing can go against it. It was Bartholomew, of course. Jesus chuckled. Yes, my friend, and I have come to make you living things. When you love differently, you live, you swim upstream. Life is no longer dictated to you. You choose to be joyful. You choose to be kind. You choose to love. Yes, it's harder than going with the flow. Yes, it may cost you more, but you will be free from the pull of sin. You will be free whether your number is visible or not. You will be free to love your enemies, to love your masters. Now Jesus rubbed the back of his neck. He looked as if the hopeful message he had just delivered held no hope for him. He spoke again. Unfortunately, you were not made to swim upstream. On your own, you cannot do it. The crowd mumbled like they had just received a bait and switch offer from their trusted leader. That is why I am here, to sacrifice myself to change the course of this river. As he said it, the earth rumbled slightly, and there was a low-frequency shudder along the banks. Something was happening with the river. It was slowing. Then, ripple by ripple, it stopped and was completely still. The crowd held its breath. Then, ever so slowly, the current started flowing north, gradually at first, but picking up speed till the Mississippi was defying its only instinct. The family didn't know how to respond to this. Who was this man, this Jesus? Who was his father? Was he truly sent by God, from God, to do what he just said? Who can make a river change its course simply by suggesting it? Maddie's eyes were saucers. I'm sure mine were as well. I think we both made a decision in that moment. Whoever this Jesus was, he deserved nothing less than our complete devotion and trust. He cleared his throat. He had one more thing he wanted to say. To make a new way through history, a way that isn't the way of death, a sacrifice must be made. I have been sent to be that sacrifice. Whispers among the crowd. I have chosen to lay down my life so that you, each of you, will no longer be slaves to the current of sin. I am your forgiveness. I am your ride upstream. I am the new, different kind of love that can change the world, that can bring you freedom, that can, an explosion rocked the gathering, then another. A line of tanks were rumbling toward us, south along River Road, firing above the heads of the crowd. The crowd scattered like a school of frightened fish. I noticed that one seemed to be aimed directly at the stage where Jesus was standing. I left Maddie and ran full speed toward the stage, yelling for Jesus to get down. I was still 50 feet away when I saw Peter grab Jesus by the ankles, pulling him from the stage, running toward me with Jesus on his back. Seconds later, the stage was hit by a mortar and blew into 1,000 pieces. Peter and Jesus were thrown to the ground. I felt a piece of something graze my arm. It was chaos. 10,000 people running in every direction, climbing bluffs, jumping in the river. Once the stage was hit, the tanks retreated and headed back up the hill. I saw Peter and Jesus push themselves from the dirt, shaking the cobwebs from their jostled brains. They were okay. I was okay, other than a small cut on my arm. Lying there, bleeding, I couldn't help but wonder how many decisions to love differently had just been rescinded. Fighting differently? Probably out the window as well. I looked back toward the river. It was flowing south.